This episode is brought to you by San Pellegrino. A meal isn't just about what's on your plate. It's about what you bring to the table. San Pellegrino believes the table is where the best of life happens. That's what makes gathering around it so rich and rewarding. And with their unique sparkling natural mineral water, San Pellegrino brings its best so you can bring yours.
To be absolutely clear, did you just say to me 300 to 400 billion pounds worth of cuts in public spending?
Correct.
That's what you're aiming
Inside the first term. Yeah, that's exactly what Nigel said in his speech last week.
All right.
Welcome to Quiet Riot, the politics podcast that aims to inform rather than irritate. I'm Alex Andreou.
And I'm Zoe Williams, filling in for Naomi, who is busy running the world.
This podcast's premise is pretty simple, that you are as smart, if not smarter than us, and that you want to participate rather than just spectate.
So kick off your shoes, pour yourself a large one, and get ready for another Quiet Riot.
Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot. I'm Alex.
And I'm Zoe.
This week, the Defence Strategic Review is out. The departmental spending plans are days away, so the government's priorities are clearer than they have ever been. But are they the right ones?
They say history doesn't repeat itself, but sometimes it does rhyme. So, what can the current Labour government learn from the legacy of Harold Wilson, a Labour PM who came in after almost 13 years of Tory rule and tried to balance strict finances with demands for more public spending?
There is only one person in the whole world, it feels like, that could help us on both those topics. He put in shifts in work and pensions, trade, education, health, and as Home Secretary, and he has just published a biography of Harold Wilson. Welcome to Quiet Riot, Alan Johnson.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Alan, as a young man in the 1970s, you worked as a postman. Did you ever imagine that walking those routes would eventually lead you all the way to the Home Office?
Not at all, no. Funnily enough, my delivery, which was a place called Littleworth Common in Buckinghamshire, is where the Home Secretary's country residence, Dorney Wood, was then the Home Secretary. It's now the Chancellor's. It's swapped over.
See.
I used to deliver to Dorney Wood.
Wow.
That's
And
strange.
I was telling John Prescott about this, dear late departed John Prescott, when he was in his pomp and there was a bit of trouble about Dorney Wood and all that.
I remember that.
And I said to John, I remember Dorney Wood. I said, such a lovely building. He said, yeah, he said, that staircase as you walk in. I said, I never saw that, John. I used to deliver the mail to the servants' quarters, which in the language of Labour, trying to outdo each other about who who's got one.
I am more working class than
made
you.
John posh and me going to the servants' quarters. Yeah, so that's as close as I ever got to thinking about the Home Secretary. No, I didn't. I thought about the union, but I didn't think about politics.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's extraordinary that people could have that career trajectory. It feels quite alien now, doesn't it? I mean, there is a smattering of people in Labour who come from that kind of background.
And the thing is, you can tell, when you hear them speak, you can tell who's got a union hinterland. Not just in kind of language and delivery and performance. It's also just a kind of guts understanding that you're arguing for everybody.
That's true.
That's
but,
true.
This is the first cabinet, I think, of any stripe that has only one public school educated, if that, in the cabinet. Macmillan's cabinet was a cabinet of 19, 13 of whom were old Etonians, and that was only the late 50s. So we've got a completely different cabinet with all people who were state educated. That's very unusual.
Yeah.
Harold Wilson would be proud of that. But this argument that, but they're not horny-handed sons of toil, they are the children and sometimes grandchildren of horny-handed sons of toil who wanted their kids and their grandkids to have something better.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't deride them or, in my kind of inverted Labour world, be snooty about them because they were never postmen or never
It's not so much that. It's not
rubbish
that,
collectors.
It's
or
not that
whatever.
we're not deriding them for not having a manual enough job. It's more about kind of union organising and unions as the DNA of the Labour Party. You would agree. Oh, that's a really important thing. That I feel is quite invisible in modern politics. Quiet Riot. When we are being directly threatened by states with advanced military forces, the most effective way to deter them is to be ready, said Keir Starmer on Monday, unveiling the Strategic Defence Review, all of the 62 recommendations of which the government has accepted, adding, "The moment has arrived to transform how we defend ourselves." Yet somehow the largest increase in defence spending since the Cold War has ended up being criticised by the same media that would have been issuing wraparound Union Jack commemorative editions of their newspapers had it been announced by a Conservative Prime Minister. Meanwhile, having committed to this radical reallocation of funds, for few apparent political plaudits, opponents of the administration are now focused on the departmental budgets due to be announced next week to see which areas will pay for this defence splurge. Has the government got its priorities broadly right? If it has not, what should it do differently? And if it has, why has it found itself being criticised whatever choices it makes? So, Alan.
That's a good excellent question.
I mean, you've seen plenty of departmental tugs of war in your time. Who do you think's been beaten, if you don't mind that kind of military terminology, in order to get this on the table in the first place?
International development. I don't think it's still a department, but it's certainly, which was something Harold Wilson virtually invented, by the way. He wrote a book in the 1940s about what became the charity War on Want. Why can't countries unite to fight poverty the way they united to fight fascism? And that led to War on Want. And in his great White Heat of Technology speech, which he made as leader of the opposition, not as prime minister, he talked about having a minister for international development and having a department for international development. So Harold would be very concerned at what's happened lately, but pragmatic Harold would see that, pragmatic circumstances meant we had to bolster our defence spending. Where's the money going to come from, et cetera, et cetera. So he would understand that. I'm not here as a spokesman for the Labour government. This is a Labour government I have nothing at all to do with. I don't particularly know Keir Starmer.
But you are
But I do
nice
agree with what Zoe said there at the beginning of that. I mean, I think Keir Starmer deserves a better press on some of this stuff. And I agree. I look at it from a perspective of what has gone before. I've never lived through 14 years that we've experienced after 2010. And I think people from all political persuasions, from the age of austerity through all the other travails that we've had to endure, there was a competence issue, certainly an absolute competence issue, but it was also what is this country about now? And I include the referendum of 2016 in that because, it was virtually a conservative issue. I kind of approach what Starmer's doing from a perspective of having once been a professional politician. What would I have done there? 97, you remember this, Zoe, when we came in, there wasn't this same bleak economic inheritance. No. There was some money around.
There was money, or as we used to call it, fiscal headroom. Yeah. I never even knew what that meant. I was
Not much of that left for Rachel Reeves now. No.
There was the availability of debt, which we no longer have.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of bit us on the arse since 2007. But what there also was a optimism which I cannot fathom how it's been extinguished as totally as it has. Because it's one thing being really aware of national debts across the OECD, across the world. It's one thing knowing that things are really tight. It's one thing knowing that essentially wealth inequality is sucking money out of both individuals' pockets and welfare states. But the kind of pervasive sense of everything being pretty hopeless and praying to the gods of growth while not really believing that they're going to deliver is something I think has been I know I always say this. I think it's been created by the right-wing media.
I saw the reaction of the media as a core to what was being announced, and I was genuinely stunned because I had spent so many years complaining that the Conservative government would come out and announce something, some initiative, without any cost attached, any date, any milestones or any funding, and everyone would just run with it as if it were a thing that will happen.
New hospitals.
That will happen naturally. And then Starmer comes out and announces this thing, and everyone is demanding to see where every single line of expenditure will come from in 10 years' time.
Yeah.
And if you're not telling us, it means it's not real. Simultaneously, Nigel Farage is in another city saying, I will save 500 million from efficiency. And everyone is going, oh, okay, let's make that a headline.
Yeah.
And I don't get how the standard being applied can be so different.
I know, I do agree with you, because I was listening to Bridget Phillipson on the Today programme, and somebody, it wasn't even one of the mean ones, but one of the presenters was absolutely tearing into her for things not yet having been achieved, or costing more than she thought, or making promises she couldn't afford. And I was thinking, after the governments we've just lived through, successive nonsense promises, which they didn't even have a hope of delivering. Orientation towards Labour is that nothing it can possibly do will be enough, and everything it suggests will be too expensive, which is a very different orientation. But having said that, I do broadly think that Labour government is doing quite a bad job.
It didn't get off to a good start, that's for sure. But there wasn't the same optimism, was there? I mean, although that, in 97, in a sense, Labour Party had been prepared for it over the period, Kinnock, followed by Smith, followed by Blair. All those changes took place over. For Starmer, I never thought any leader could bring us back from 2019.
No, I don't think anyone did.
I thought we were dead in the water. A genuine existential crisis, which they're trying to say now because of reform. Reform is an existential crisis for the Tories. But that was how are we going to have done it in 5 years? And then you look at it, well, we've done it, with a big majority, but it's not deep. It's not, there was no people dancing to the polling booths. And I think part of that is we've been through the age of austerity. We've been through MPs' expenses. We've been through the referendum. We've been through 2 referendums, one in Scotland and one on Europe. And all of that has made people much more cynical, much more prone to pessimism than they were in 97.
I remember doing a live show just before Christmas 2019 at the Leicester Square Theatre. I was part of a political panel. And everyone was talking not just about a second Johnson term, they were talking about a third Johnson term.
Yeah.
And we did questions from the audience at the end. And someone said, is there any hope you can offer? And I said, yes, I think there is, because in my experience, personalities like Johnson unwind themselves. He will overreach and fail in quite spectacular ways and pretty quickly. So I think everyone that's saying, he's there for the next 15 years is not taking that type of personality into account.
I know, but I worry about, because I think it's a many-headed Hydra thing. You'll like that, because
obviously.
We all have to do that. I'll think about
how many.
But essentially, Boris Johnson did unravel, but he caused all the damage he was going to cause in the space of that unraveling, and he has tainted politics and tainted political language and tainted the way the media relates to it and tainted the way people relate to it. And every single time somebody breaks a promise, that does sever a democratic bond, which somebody then has to rebuild. So
you say that, Zoe, but yet the person who's doing well out of this is Nigel Farage, who is the main architect of that first big lie. Let's leave Europe and things will get automatically fantastic. And I don't understand how people flock to the same quack and say, we tried your green snake oil, now we'll try the pink one.
I kind of do understand it. Bernie Sanders says exactly the same thing about Trump. Basically, Trump came in and said, your lives are terrible and I'm going to fix them. And he was right that people are having really difficult lives. So at least people hear something that they think is true, because it is true. Whereas the kind of left, both in America and here, is coming and saying, okay, your lives are terrible. There's not a lot we can do. We're going to do this small thing. Oh, no, we're going to not do that small thing. Oh, no, we're going to spend that money on drones. Oh, no, you're going to have less carers allowance. You've got somebody.
I don't disagree.
So you might not. I don't believe Nigel Farage, obviously.
I don't disagree. All I'm saying is that it's not just about broken promises, because then the people who broke the big promises would be being punished more than we are seeing at the moment. So there is a way to make promises and break them with a kind of elan that allows you to just move on to the next.
But you're talking, Alex, as if the people who are most disgruntled think that something has changed. They thought Brexit wasn't a referendum on Europe. It was it was a referendum on immigration.
Yeah.
There's no question it was the immigration figures and the net migration figures that Cameron announced 4 weeks before polling day.
Yeah.
A record 333,000. Never before. It was 120,000 when I was Home Secretary.
Yeah.
And here was the guy who said he'd get it down to tens of thousands, presiding over the Remain campaign, David Cameron. And it was 333,000. Then it went to 990,000. With the Tories in power saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and that was a central thing. And, whether the left likes it or not, those communities felt that something was out of control, that they had no say in whatsoever. And Brexit didn't solve it, so they're still... So hold on, we said in the Labour campaign that actually, if you leave the European Union, it'll make it worse. You won't have the Dublin Accord to send people back.
Not just that.
Blah, 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 blah. But anyway...
As an immigrant from the European Union, I think there was another effect that was really not thought about. I did not have to make a permanent decision. I could come, I could work for a bit, and then maybe choose another country, go. I didn't have to think about moving my whole family. And now the process is such that every decision to immigrate is a permanent one. It's a big move. You think, will I be able to bring my family over? You invest money and time into the process of getting approved. So you're not then going to leave.
Type of,
Just to pick up for a second, because you said the Department for International Development would be hardest hit, or else, aid budgets in a more kind of...
It's part of the Foreign Office now, isn't it? I don't know whether it's...
Yeah, it is. It's FCD.
Can you not see other departments also feeling the pinch, though?
Oh, I can. I only pick out that because it's an obvious percentage issue. So they kind of marry up nicely, and Starmer has already said that the ambitions on international development have to be reduced. I can see others being hit, but if I was Yvette Cooper, I'd be doing exactly what I think she is doing. And I know nothing about this, but of course, when you see police chiefs saying, we will not be able to keep law and order, we will not be able to carry out you kind of guess that the Home Secretary is having a battle with the Treasury. And you need the kind of troops to come out on the ground to make it clear what the effects are going to be.
And you're I think that's, them, don't tell me, tell them.
Exactly. But, I wouldn't be surprised if Yvette was very pleased to hear that, because it's helping her argument. I had those arguments when there was loads of money around on these 3-year spending reviews. God knows what kind of argument Yvette is having. Of course, Theresa May had those arguments in 2010 when she succeeded me as Home Secretary and offered up a third of all police officers. On the shrine of austerity. She offered it up. She didn't have to have it eked out of her. She said, oh, no, we'll cut the police numbers by a third. And that'll make no difference to our society.
And hilariously then, over 15 years, they rebuilt those numbers and presented it as a massive bonus.
Boris Johnson. But they were recruiting novices and they'd got rid of veterans,
Quiet Riot. Now, this is an advertisement from BetterHelp. Thanks to them for sponsoring today's show. 1 in 8 men is thought to have a mental health disorder. That's a huge amount of suffering, and much of it goes unnoticed and without help. We live in a pressure cooker world, and it's no secret that bottling things up can lead to depression, burnout, and other problems. And while we might be told that it's okay to struggle, the truth is that men in particular still find it difficult to open up about their burdens. If you're a man, and this sounds close to home, then I really can't emphasise how important it is that you reach out to someone you can trust and talk to, whether that's a friend, a loved one, or a therapist. My experience with therapy is that it can be the first step towards regaining control of your life, whatever mental health challenges you may be facing. And if you're sceptical or nervous about this approach, I can assure you it's far better than doing nothing, changing nothing, and suffering silently. If you're looking for somewhere to start, then BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform with more than 5,000 therapists in the UK. You can join a session with a UK therapist and you can switch therapists at any time. Its users rate it highly. BetterHelp has an App Store rating of 4.9 out of 5 based on 1.7 million client reviews. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off the first month at betterhelp.com/quietriot. That's betterhelp.com/quietriot.
Quiet Riot. Every part of society Every citizen of this country has a role to play, because we have to recognise that things have changed. In the world of today, the front line, if you like, is here. The threat we now face is more serious, more immediate, and more unpredictable than at any time since the Cold War.
Back to defence for a moment. I've been wondering, does the reaction to Trump's change of stance, to basically withdrawing the US from its global protector role, I guess, does this reaction indicate that people think it's permanent, even if he's not president anymore, that this is a permanent change in America's stance? And if it's not, are we overreacting? Could we not try to ride it out a little bit more?
Not with Putin and Ukraine happening on our doorstep. I think people's fear is this is permanent.
Yeah.
And let's face it, the grand old party, as they call the Republicans, it is now a cult of the personality.
Yeah.
Probably has been captured completely. So whoever succeeds Trump will be another Trumpian. On defence, you can't take chances, can you? On defence, you can't say, oh, well, we'll gamble that when Trump goes, it'll all go back to normal. You know, this has happened. We've got to react to it.
Yeah, because after his first term, I remember a lot of people in policy circles all across Europe saying that this can't happen again. We have to Trump-proof was the term they were using. Yeah. We have to Trump-proof European defence. But then nobody did anything because without the immediate threat there, you can't do this kind of thing. You can't say, I'm going to take X amount of money from that department and put it in defence. Is there a universe in which this might be a good thing, actually? That this pressure being put on Europe is making us move into a state of more independence in defence that is a better state in which to be?
I mean, for sure, a kind of over-reliance on the United States does put you in hock to the United States agenda, which is problematic on two fronts. One is that it's not, you don't always share it. And the other is that it changes quite dramatically when it does change. My problem with kind of saber rattling, I can't remember whether it was the Netherlands or Poland, but they were talking about getting to 5% of GDP on defence within the foreseeable couple of years. I just don't think we're thinking hard enough about what we're bringing on. We're making it sound like shades of a percent are the negotiation we're having, but we're really having a conversation about how much warfare we're prepared to wage and how much we're prepared to be involved in it. Yeah. Would obviously need to talk about whether it would be drone warfare or ground troops. We would have to talk about how many people being killed we'd be prepared to see. And I just don't think we're thinking about it. We had at The Guardian, we had Fiona Hill, you know, the advisor to Trump actually in the 2016, but she's no Trumpian and he's no fan of hers. She's a civil servant. But she said, people keep asking me whether this will bring about World War III. And actually, we're already in World War III. What do you think the beginning of World War I and II looked like? They looked like mass events of death, which institutions were powerless or declined to prevent. And we're seeing that in Europe and in the Middle East. So I think we're further into the conflict than we think we are, and yet we're further behind in the discussion than we need to be.
I think that's true. I think it's also true that you can have A without degrading into B.
I don't think you can look at Gaza and Ukraine as two things that are happening simultaneously and say that anything similar has happened. Certainly not in my lifetime. I'm 50.
Yeah, I think that's right. But it's also going back to our first conversation about Starmer, etc. He's been incredibly competent and impressive on the world stage. Yeah. I didn't expect that. Usually they talk about a prime minister, it's taken them a long time to establish themselves on the world stage. He did it very quickly, and I think part of that is reacting to Trump and how you feel about Trump. He played him beautifully. I mean, Starmer is a musician. He played Trump like his clarinet or whatever he's particularly good at, in terms of getting from him what he wanted. And maybe we'll see how this pans out, but it looks like steel and aluminium maybe. You know, he's living in the real world and doing pragmatic things he needs to do.
The only country in the world, actually, that is exempt from
and I think on defence, because we are, one of only two nuclear powers in Europe, it's also helped to bring us back centre stage in the European debate. And I think a lot of what we're doing now isn't just going to the next stage of how many weapons and, as Zoe says, how much warfare do you want? It's actually what struck me is the kind of accommodation that army families are living in, the kind of degradation that the system's got into, even if you're not going to up your game to deal with Putin. Just decent accommodation is a start. And recruiting now, because even Hull constituency I represent was one of the biggest providers of soldiers in particular in the country. And they went in generally because the pay and all of that was pretty good. And now it's awful.
And it's interesting how central those things were to the Strategic Defence Review.
And I think
they
there is an element of
the
that.
Housing.
Yeah.
They talked about recruitment. It was actually quite a radical defence review, I thought.
I think Healy's one of the quiet successes of the
because apparently they had France, Germany and the States involved from the very beginning, which is not the way these things usually go, as I understand it from intelligence experts. The UK would do its strategic defence review and then in the latter stages share it with NATO allies and say, what do you think about this? But in this case, apparently, everyone was involved right from the start, because one of the key things about it is that there's no point us developing the same things, researching the same things as France is, for instance, where we could in parallel be complementary to each other.
I mean, that's quite ironic with your Romaniac hat on.
Yeah,
it's quite ironic.
Right?
Like when
I know. Who knew that war would get us back into the largest peace project?
Are you a Romaniac?
Can I ask, Zoe?
Yes.
We do seem to be in a place of consensus, weirdly. Like, everyone seems to accept that defence spending is a priority now.
No, I'm not there at all.
Okay, you may not be there at all, but the response from the left, the reaction has been more muted than it would have in the past.
But what you've got to remember is the left within the Labour Party has been completely capsized in terms of its voice within the Labour Party. There is no coherent socialist caucus. I know we don't really talk about caucuses, but under Miliband's Labour leadership, of course, he wasn't Prime Minister, but there would have been a very strong body of MPs to the left of him and a pretty strong body of MPs to the right of him. Yeah. And now there just isn't that kind of organisation within the party. So you don't hear a lot of people saying, hang on a second, maybe I'm not a pacifist, but I do believe in human security above border security, and this is not okay, irrespective of the cuts to carers and disability allowances, which are catastrophic. I think that side of things is a little bit dissipated at the moment. A kind of disorganised body of opinion is fighting, on the one hand, that there's not a solid enough response to Gaza. On the other hand, that these talks with Trump and his emissaries are basically, we'll do anything you want. Please don't tariff us. Keir Starmer does seem to have very kind of strong initial responses, like, for example, in support of Zelensky, but then are they followed up? Are they backtracked on? Is his language contradictory? Often his language is quite contradictory. We want to be in a special relationship with the US while at the same time deploring literally everything it does. So what you're looking at on the left is a lot of people saying, seriously, somebody have some values here. Somebody in some party iterate a pro-immigration, pro-refugee, anti-war, pro-social security safety net. Somebody do that for us, because that's what the left is for.
I agree with that entire list, and yet all I see is diplomacy. That does involve speaking out of both sides of your mouth.
But okay. I mean, can I just drop a controversial name into the room?
Go.
Peter Mandelson. Where are we on Peter Mandelson?
I don't know. Where are we on Peter Mandelson?
He's a diplomat these days. Well,
I just find everything he says about America extremely concerning. He doesn't seem to find anything.
I find it concerning if he was
What's he going to do?
He was a minister. He's our ambassador.
I know, but obviously diplomats are diplomatic. But all of his language seems to be, they're absolutely great. Isn't it wonderful to be in the shadow of their strength? And I just find that really deplorable, because it is pretty serious what's happening in America.
Quiet Riot. If you've shopped online, chances are you've bought from a business powered by Shopify. You know that purple Shop Pay button you see at checkout? The one that makes buying so incredibly easy? That's Shopify. And there's a reason so many businesses sell with it, because Shopify makes it incredibly easy to start and run your business. Shopify is the commerce platform behind 10% of all e-commerce in the US. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/promo. Go to shopify.com/promo.
Over the next week, you will hear a lot of debate about my so-called self-imposed fiscal rules. Now, contrary to some conventional wisdom, I didn't come into politics because I care passionately about fiscal rules. I came into politics because I want to make a difference to the lives of working people. Because I believe as strongly now as I did when I was inspired to join the Labour Party almost 30 years ago, that every person should have the same opportunities as others to thrive and to succeed, no matter what their parents do, no matter where they grow up. And because I know that economic responsibility and social justice go hand in hand.
Final question. Rachel Reeves made a speech on Wednesday. So alongside this big increase in defence spending, she is persisting that her fiscal rules are non-negotiable. The manifesto commitments on tax ditto. And yet there is a softening of language on winter fuel payments and on the 2-child benefit cap. Something's got to give in that mathematical equation, doesn't it? You can't.
I would think so, yeah.
Sort of increase spending, not increase taxes.
They're not going to reverse the winter fuel allowance.
What
they'll do.
They must do.
No, they won't.
Come on,
they won't go back to it being. They won't go back to being a universal benefit.
No, they will.
What they can do, and that will do nothing for pensioner poverty. Giving me 300 quid or whatever it is when I'm over 80, 200 quid now, will do nothing for pensioner poverty. What I think they'll do is all the kind of tapers and maybe increase pension credit, put pension credit up, which would generally make a contribution to the pension of poverty that exists now, which is nothing like the extreme pension of poverty that existed in 1997 when we came into power. I mean, they're amongst the most prosperous now pensions for the first time in history, by the way. Being old is no longer associated with being poor. So they won't do that. No, they won't do that. I think they'll get rid of the 2-child policy. So they should. Once again, I feel sympathy for Rachel Reeves. She delivers a budget of which 90% of the population gain. The only people who don't are the top 10%. A better budget in terms of equality than Gordon ever managed to deliver. Takes £70 billion from the only place she basically can take it. 76 billion actually, but 70 billion in direct terms, which is from businesses, from employers' national insurance. You can't take it anywhere else. We're the most heavily taxed than we've been in my lifetime.
And still quite middling by European standards.
Still, but we might get up to 44% of GDP. Sure. And she makes a big step along that way, lifts the minimum wage at the same time, puts all that 76 billion into public services and gets criticised from the left as well as from the right.
I think what we're failing to understand is just how threatening the language has come across to the people who need benefits and services most. So the cuts to disability allowance and carers allowance, at the moment, it's really hard to kind of make out where they're going or where they're likely to go. But people are petrified. And carers in this country, and that's not a small number. It's like 5 to 7 million people. Numbers are it's a massive army of people, almost all of whom are in grinding poverty. So even the language of we might have to tighten our belts a bit more from a government that promised to be an end to austerity, focused on the people who already have the least, is really petrifying. And I don't think
that's their dilemma. But Zoe, I was talking about the budget in which the benefit.
Yeah, but I'm kind of explaining why she's not getting the credit that you think she's due, and it is because nobody who's really struggling is feeling feeling any uplift, and a lot of people who are really struggling are living in dread of what comes next. I think her language has got to change, and what would really help if she could somehow iterate that she is a fiscal conservative in the sense that she wants to balance the books, but she's not going to fix her sights on the already poorest. I think that would be helpful to her. I mean, I'm saying that as a critical friend. Yeah.
And on that, I think, is the call to action attached to this first topic. So the consultation on the reform of disability benefits is still open. It's open until the end of June. There is a survey. We will share the link in the show notes. And please respond with your specific concerns, because rage can be debilitating rather than empowering. There is at the moment a conduit to let the government know which specific aspects of what they're proposing are problematic. And we should all avail ourselves of that opportunity. My disappointment, I guess, in what's being proposed is how defensive the government have been about it.
Yeah.
It's a green paper. It's meant to be the beginning of a conversation. There's a consultation out there. Don't barricade yourself and defend every aspect of it to the death as if it's what you're going to do anyway. Or if that's the case, then just introduce the legislation and do it. Don't pretend you're consulting and then ignore everything everyone says.
Quiet riot. And now it is that time of the week when Alex plumbs the depths of right-wing paranoia for the latest pearl declared political correctness gone mad. It's time for Wokey Dokey.
Wokey Dokey.
What have you got for us this week, Alex?
So how could I have resisted the item suggested by so many listeners in the Daily Mail, entitled Fisherman's Fury as Disaster Octopus Invasion Destroys Their Catch Thanks to Woke Rule Allowing Predators to Treat Them Like McDonald's. I have to tell you, I had to read that piece 3 or 4 times just to make heads of or tails of what they were talking about. So this is what it comes down to, right? Conservation rules, apparently, have meant that fishermen in Plymouth, Devon, etc., have to leave small escape gaps in their pots where they catch lobsters and crab so that the smaller ones can go free, basically, so that they don't catch them too young. But because it's unseasonably warm and climate change, obviously, thousands of Mediterranean octopuses have migrated north, and they're a very efficient predator, and they're eating all the crab and lobsters.
So hang on a sec, do they get caught in the net as well, and then eat them while they're in the net?
No, they're cages.
They're just
They're cages
okay.
in which
I see.
And because there is this escape hatch, the octopi, is it octopi or octopuses?
You would know.
Octopi.
All Greek to me. Yeah.
They can go in, eat the crab, and come back out from the escape hatch. But how this ties to wokeness and the EU, I don't know, and I'm not sure the Daily Mail do either. So I was reading, and it says that, one of the affected fisher people was complaining if they eat the juveniles, where's the new stock going to come from? And then the next sentence is, it's just another kick in the teeth after the new EU fishing deal. So that just seems to be the link. And then I found out that these rules have nothing to do with European policy or even with national policy. They're local. So this is the Devon and Severn Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority that imposed the rules because they were finding that stocks were being overfished, basically, and they've now relaxed them. But apparently this same fisher person thinks it's too late now.
I have to say, Alex, even listening to you say fisher people sounds like wokeness gone mad.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yes.
I hope any fishermen or fisher women listening will contact us to tell us what the right term is.
So I guess conservation rules in general are woke. Even though, the main culprit here is the temperature of the water going up. And that seems to be largely unacknowledged by the Daily Mail. It's all about, bureaucrats making rules. So there you go.
Thank you, Alex.
Octopus is woke.
Yes, octopus conservation and climate change, all woke. And listeners, we love hearing about instances of wokey dokiness that you find on the internet. So do keep them coming to quietriotpod@gmail.com. Quiet Riot.
This episode is brought to you by GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco. Get the most out of your vehicle with GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco original equipment. The only parts designed, engineered, tested, and backed by General Motors. You can find your perfect fit for most makes and models and choose from 3 tiers of parts, including GM OE or gold and silver aftermarket parts. Visit gmparts.com for more information.
He isn't honest and he isn't a man of principle, but a sheer absolute careerist out for himself alone. This is how Bevan described Harold Wilson, unhappy with what is often described as Wilson's slalom race, trying to negotiate each gate as it comes while going downhill. In recent years, many have come to review this image of Wilson as an amoral careerist, including some of his critics. In 2014, Roy Hattersley wrote, "The prevailing view that Wilson was shifty was too strongly and too widely held for me to resist," before concluding he was right about far more than I was willing to concede at the time. Alan, you've just put out a brilliant biography, brilliantly timed biography of Wilson. And the reason I say that is, were you conscious while writing it just how many parallels there were with Starmer, especially given their shared rocky start, actually, because Wilson had a really bad first year.
Yeah, and both were kind of disinterested in politics in their student days. Of course, the big difference is when Wilson left 10 Downing Street, having won 4 elections, only matched by Gladstone, won a European referendum, not matched by Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton, done all the things he'd been, President of the Board of Trade, served in Attlee's government, and all of that. He was 2 years younger than Starmer was walking in to 10 Downing Street. So there's a big difference in their experience on assuming office, but lots of parallels about the time spent out of office, about the pressures when they'd come in. The economy was in a real mess. The Tories back in 1964, when Wilson won his first election, was saying that there was a trade deficit. The trade deficit then was a very big thing of £1 million a day. When Wilson opened the books, he found it was more than double what they'd said. And all those economic woes that he had to battle against. And he immediately came under pressure from a very, very powerful American president. In Starmer's case, it was Trump. In Wilson's case, it was Lyndon B. Johnson, who wanted Britain to commit troops to Vietnam. And both of them, both Starmer and Wilson, managed to say no. In Starmer's case, it was to what Trump wanted him to do with Ukraine. Wilson's case, it was about Vietnam. But maintain what, I don't like the term, but a good relationship, let's say that, rather than a special relationship, with America. Wilson managed that then for the next 11 years. Not a single British soldier served in Vietnam. So there were parallels, definitely, in those times.
You describe Wilson as the first prime minister of the modern age, and he did embrace change. Let's have a little listen to the famous white heat of technology speech.
Mr. Chairman, let me conclude with what I think the message of all this is for this conference. Because in this conference, in all our plans for the future, we are redefining and we are restating our socialism in terms of the scientific revolution. But that revolution cannot become a reality unless we are prepared to make far-reaching changes in economic and social attitudes which permeate our whole system of society. The Britain that is going to be forged in the white heat of this revolution will be no place for restrictive practices or for outdated methods on either side of industry.
Did this sense of flux at the time, what the German Chancellor called very well Zeitenwende, this idea that the end of one age and the beginning of another, did this help or hinder Wilson? Because I'm not sure. I read things in your book where it was incredibly useful to him to be seen as a modern person that embraced that stuff, but also aspects in which he was seen as out of touch with traditional industries and the working man. So on balance, do you think it was a help or a hindrance?
Oh, it was a help, but it was a help really because of the Conservative Party that he was facing. So his opponent, elected shortly after, so he was elected as leader of the Labour Party. Macmillan resigned over the Profumo scandal. And the Profumo scandal in itself set the groundwork probably for Wilson's victory in 64. Tories were suddenly very unpopular. They were mired in sleaze. But the man that the Tories, who emerged, by the way, the Tories didn't have elections amongst their MPs, let alone amongst their members. A group of chaps got together in convivial surroundings over a glass of brandy and decided it was like a papal conclave. The smoke went up the chimney. Who did they give? To Harold Wilson, the first state-educated prime minister since the war, first prime minister who'd not been to public school since the war. Who did they give him as an opponent? The 14th Earl of Hume, who renounced his peerages. He had 7 of them, all for the nefarious activities of his ancestors.
Wasn't one enough?
Yeah, all from the Middle Ages. Anyway, he renounced them and became Sir Alec Douglas Hume. There is as I say in the book, there's an amazing period, 6 weeks in our long constitutional history, when we had a prime minister who was neither in the Lords or the Commons. So Wilson very cleverly was picking up on this kind of mood of the moment, and it expressed itself in music, it expressed itself in culture. It was the baby boom generation becoming teenagers. It was the television age. It was the space age, as it became very quickly with Sputniks more than Neil Armstrong. And Wilson picked up on it in that speech in Scarborough in 1963 when he was the leader of the opposition. He wrote every word himself of that speech, not just about the way of technology. He wanted Labour to be seen as much as, in terms of attire, the white laboratory coat as much as the cloth cap. But also, in that speech, he condemned selective education aged 11, the 11 plus. He condemned the fact that 200,000 students every year couldn't get a university place that they'd qualified for because of something called norm referencing that kept it as the preserve of a small elite. He called for an open university, University of the Air. It was an incredibly forward-looking speech. And did it hit the zeitgeist? Yeah, sure it did. And he used the analogy of cricket because the MCC had just ended the differentiation between gentlemen and players. Incredibly, it only finished in 63. And if you were a gentleman, you were a public school boy, you were a bumbling amateur, but you could captain England. No player, professional, qualified, good at it, could ever do it. Yeah. If you were a gentleman, you used a different gate to step out onto Lords. Or you had your tea in a different room from the oiks that were professionals. Your initials were announced before your name rather than afterwards. All of this was a great kind of way of illustrating the class system. And he said the MCC banished gentlemen and players, but it still exists in our government and in our society. And it absolutely struck a chord.
John Major once called his pipe a symbol of tranquility in times of turmoil. What was Churchill's cigar in that context? Because it's interesting that they had this signature thing, and one seems to me quite an aggressive thing, and the other seems to me quite a laid-back, let me think about it symbol.
And Baldwin was a famous pipe smoker as well, but with Wilson, it really caught on. It's the illustration on the front of my book. It was used as a poster, just a pipe with smoke coming out, in the 66 election, where Wilson got a majority of near enough 100.
That well known.
He was that well known, and he used the famous thing from a beer advert. By golly, he does you good, which was a kind of advert for Mackeson at the time. Then it was used against him. So this thing you referred to about Wilson being slippery and two-faced and all that, which was rubbish, by the way. I mean, he just outsmarted people, and the people he outsmarted were the ones who called him slippery and difficult and all that. But part of that myth was that he really smoked cigarettes and cigars, and he loved all that. But because he wanted to look like a pleb from Huddersfield, he would put the absolute total rubbish from everyone he knew. He developed the pipe in negotiations with a Russian on trade, which was quite a big deal because it's the first Russian-British trade deal since the revolution, because he found it was a negotiating a good negotiating ploy. All that stuff of, the paraphernalia of a pipe where you fill the tobacco up and then you press it
like
down.
A tea ceremony.
It gave you time to think and he used it as a negotiating tool and also to make himself look older because he was the youngest cabinet minister since 1804. And he smoked the pipe all the time. So, he didn't switch around. He might have had the odd cigar, but he was a genuine pipe smoker.
Most biographers, when they're, really in the bowels of somebody's life, either come away feeling great about them or come away really disliking them. What are your feelings about Wilson? I kind of already know because you smile whenever he comes up.
I'm a huge fan. I wish I'd met him.
Yeah.
The book's dedicated to a woman called Sue Utting, who worked for Harold for 10 years and worked for me 30 years later. And Sue and George Howarth and people I've spoken to who knew Wilson, and Ben Pimlott, who wrote the full fat version, if you like, biography of Wilson, published in 1992, couldn't find anyone who would say other than he didn't have an ounce of pretentiousness or pomposity about him.
Yeah.
Even after he'd done all the things he'd done, stepped down at 60, the only prime minister post-war to step down at their own volition without being forced out either by the electorate or his party.
Yeah.
He chose when to step down. And he chose that because Mary wanted out of politics and he'd had enough. So he chose to go at 60. But even then, he was around in the Commons for another 7 years and then went into the Lords. And nobody who knew him when he was entitled perhaps to be a bit, former Prime Minister, didn't have an ounce of that in his personality. And I admire that more than anything else. I admire his humanity. And when you...
So you've come away from the project feeling even more affection for him.
Well, yeah.
Because sometimes the shine comes off,
But I grew up... I left school under Wilson. I started work for the post office under Wilson. I got married under Wilson. 2 of my kids were born under Wilson. I became a union official under Wilson. I remember what a huge character he was and how he dominated the 60s politically in the same way that the Beatles dominated the 60s musically. I remember that and then wondered why his reputation just shrank away so quickly. So I was there for impressing, certainly, but when you go into a lot of the book is his early life and as a student, as a civil servant, working for Beveridge and then working for Jean Monnet, one of the 2 founders of the European Coal and Steel Community. All these things he did before he even parked his backside on the green benches. And he did that at a very young age. Everything he did, he was successful at. And his brain, that magnificent brain, was awesome.
Shelley Williams says he was underestimated because, in her words, even when he occasionally failed, the failures were rooted in a commitment to social justice. And that his real achievement is that, and I quote, he was without prejudice. He did not judge people on their color, race, gender, or class. Was Wilson, in fact, a precursor to the centre-left's move to more conservative fiscal policies, but very socially progressive, but fiscally quite tight, as it were?
Well, fiscally, he went through a lot of problems. Devaluation was the big issue of the day.
Again, another parallel.
Difficult. Yeah, but it's difficult to put devaluation into context today because we live in a world of floating currencies. But it was a big deal.
Yeah.
And he was part of the Attlee cabinet that devalued and then heard Stafford Cripps, the Chancellor at the time, say this will never happen again in his broadcast on the Home Service, as you had to do if you devalued the pound against the dollar. And then he found himself in a position of having to do it again. And he should have done it much earlier than he did. So he was living with that problem. He was living with the problem of the unions, which he did try to solve.
On the devaluation, again, I read in the book, and it's exactly what Shelley Williams is pointing out, because the reason he was cautious about devaluing it a second time is because he was apparently incredibly aware that former British colonies like India held huge reserves in sterling, and he didn't want to suddenly devalue, basically,
That's true.
the developing world's reserves.
That's
currency
amazing.
He was a
reserves.
man who
That
really,
was his big thing.
He really cared about the developing world. That's one of the reasons why he wasn't automatically a pro-European. So tomorrow is the 50th anniversary of the referendum that he won, 5th of June, 1975, 50 years. And he was powerful in that because he was a convert to Europe. His original stance had been that this would damage the Commonwealth, and he was very much a Commonwealth man.
That's fascinating. So to bring it back to today, Professor Rowan McWilliam is a director of the Labour History Research Unit at Anglia Ruskin Uni, and he published a survey of historians on the similarities between Wilson and Starmer, and in the accompanying publicity he wrote, Sir Keir Starmer's leadership has shown relatively little interest in Labour's past. The Labour leaders who have been most aware of the party's history, Michael Foot and Neil Kinnock, have been the least successful. But are there lessons in Wilson's trajectory for Starmer? Should the current Labour administration be looking at the political strategy and how they got out of that very difficult first year and taking direct lessons?
I think Starmer already is. He quotes Wilson as being the most impressive prime minister.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what Tony thought about that, but that's what Keir said. So I think they're already looking at that. It's difficult now, once again, to think how difficult it was for Wilson to keep the party together. You had the National Executive Committee that met monthly, that was a powerful body, almost like a running annual conference. They were carrying propositions all the time that were supposed to be binding on the leadership. You'd still had the feeling of MacDonald's great betrayal of 1931. This was only the 60s, only 30 years later, still in people's minds. And so he felt a lot more that part of his role was to keep the Labour Party together. Now, that probably isn't something that figures high up in Keir's list of priorities. But for Wilson, and I think for Starmer, there's always been a small group of Marxists in the Labour Party, but they're kind of irrelevant. So two groups to keep together is the intellectual progressive left and the much more blue-collar trade union right. And you had people from left and right. And Barbara Castle, his great ally over all those years, was more in the second of those rather than the first. In the first group, the intellectual, it included Tony Benn as well as Tony Crosland and Hugh Gaitskell. So it was right and left.
So you think that part of the prickliness that's still in the Labour Party has to do with them still fighting that battle even though they won it? So they need to kind of take yes for an answer and move on.
I think so. And I think if things go right over the next 4 years, they can win that battle through policy, through genuine moves forward on education, on early years, on the child poverty, all the things that I think will eventually, once the climate gets better, you can win that argument on policy, not just on the basis of some kind of Punch and Judy show with the left.
Yeah.
And the call to action for this section is very, very simply buy Alan's book. It's an absolutely brilliant biography of Harold Wilson. And as I said, could not be more timely in the lessons it has to teach. It's available in our bookshop, and I'll drop a link in the show notes so that you can help a local bookshop and you can help this podcast by buying from there.
Quiet Riot.
And now it's time for some good news. And we really do need some good news. It's time for Grin and Share It.
Good news is welcome to me. Bad news is hell come to me. Good news. Do-de-o-do-lo, 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 I want good news.
As Naomi's deputy, the duty and pleasure falls to you, Zoe. What good news have you got for us?
So, Alex, I scoured over Dale and under hill throughout global politics looking for something good that had happened. And I found a baby bear. In fact, that's a total lie. Naomi found a baby bear. Naomi loved bears. Okay, so there was a 2-month-old cub and it spent days all alone in the California forest. and it was rescued by campers in Los Padres National Forest. And now it's recovering by being fed by humans dressed as bears. And I think the thinking is that cubs, they shouldn't get too used to humans because otherwise they won't get on with the other bears. But if you dress as a bear, then everything's going to be fine.
That's the funniest thing I've ever heard in my life. And the most adorable. I kind of want to see photos now, so we'll drop a link
I'm
in.
going to put the link, which conveniently is to my very own newspaper.
Oh,
very
good.
Put that in the show notes. Hey, we might even pick up.
So are they in sort of realistic bear gear, or are they?
The weirdest thing is they're kind of dressed in camo. So they've got leaves on their heads. But then there's a guy gone full bear, which actually. And then there's like a teddy bear, which I think they're using to make the bear feel as though it's got siblings. And it's already quadrupled in size.
Oh, so it's doing well, as it were.
It's doing extremely well. Yeah.
Whatever strategy they're adopting is working.
Yeah.
Well, that is good news. We love bears.
Yeah.
I mean, cuddly little ones, obviously, not revenant type ones. And as we said, we'll drop the link in the show notes so you not just grin, but also share it.
Quiet Riot.
And that's a wrap for this week's Quiet Riot. All that remains is to thank our guest, Alan Johnson.
Thank you, Alan. It's a pleasure. Remember, our podcast is available to all at the same time, regardless of ability to pay. If you think good information should be universally available, you can help us keep it so by supporting us on ko-fi.com/quietriotpod from as little as £5 a month.
Naomi will be back for Sunday School, and I look forward to her review of my hosting debut.
Until then, remember how much we appreciate your allowing us into your headspace. We love you lots. Bye.
Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
God, I'm really off my game. The gay bear jokes were coming to me so thick and fast I failed to make a single one of them.
Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit activeday.com to apply.